How could you do this? You're supposed to bring balance to the mages, not join them. So here's my opinion on Renathal as a card. I do not mind it. I do not mind the idea of going up against a class with 40 HP or a deck with 40 cards. But here's the main problem with Renathal. As you're going to see in my top 5 picks for this particular update, you're going to notice that it is very similar to the decks that we were playing in the previous patch, except now the decks that were on top are even better than they were before, and the other decks just have a larger gap that they have to jump over. And it just really isn't good for particular archetypes like aggro, for example, because aggro has absolutely no shot of dealing with a lot of the decks that are on this list right now. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the top 5 decks in the Hearthstone meta, thanks to Prince Renathal over here. And unfortunately, I have some very bad news. The very first deck we're going to be talking about is Big Spell Mage. Oh boy, why does Renathal make this deck better? Well, for 2 reasons. Number 1, the extra 10 HP really does make a massive difference in order for this mage to keep itself alive. But another reason why the extra 10 cards don't matter is because the thing about the Big Spell Mage deck from before is that we were trying to figure out the best way of just pulling off the scam. Now you have a different win condition of just literally playing survivability cards. So No Hands Gamer, for example, has a copy of Ignis the Eternal Flame, Sleet Skater, and a bunch of other cards like Caligos. DJ Manastorm finds his way into this deck. So yeah, there is just a lot of what's going, there's a lot of things going on for Mage right now to where you can literally fit everything into the deck. You've got Star Power, you have King Tide, you've got Skyla, you've got Caligos, you've got DJ Manastorm, you have the coins, you have a lot. There is a lot that is going on in this deck, and it just supports Big Spell Mage absolutely perfectly because it can now sustain and it can now just outvalue decks that tried to kill it before it played Tsunami. And this deck right here is the particular deck that I myself have been playing on ladder because I just like how many duplicates there are. There's not a lot of like single cards like Star Power, for example. Just put 2 copies of this card into your deck. I feel like it's absolutely fine. But yeah, this deck has got a similar thing going on with it with the DJ Manastorm. Because yeah, DJ is good enough in a deck that can actually survive to the late game. And the coolest thing about this is that I've actually played this card for value by turn 5. So yeah, Big Spell Mage is absolutely swimming right now. I would not be surprised to see this deck get nerfed because unfortunately it is like 40% of the meta right now. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but I just wanted to let you guys know that Big Spell Mage is, of course, the most popular deck, and not only Diamond through Legend, but in top 10k Legend at 30%, and then at top 1000 Legend at almost 40%. So yes, this deck is back. It really is king, and it's all about trying to counter it. And according to HSReplay, the stats kind of reflect the same thing. We've been seeing a lot of Shaman decks, you know, as one of the only aggro styles that can really deal with Mage kind of consistently. You've got Paladin is like, you know, still playing Pipsi, and in Warlock playing like Pain Warlock and Insanity, and even Demon Hunter. The card, like, remember how this class was on top? It was at like a 55% win rate. Now that Renathal is back into the meta, aggro decks like Demon Hunter and Hunter are absolutely struggling. And don't even get me started on Rogue right now. Rogue just went immediately down to the worst class in the game because it doesn't have a lot of ways of dealing with these HP from Renathal decks. And just looking forward, Big Spell Mage, Rainbow Shaman, Pain Warlock, Taurus Paladin, Breakfast Hunter, Dungar Druid. In Diamond through Legend, it's just all about the decks that do their thing as quickly as possible and can maintain afterwards, versus Pirate Demon Hunter just got so much worse because they just can't kill anything anymore. And now at top 1000, it's almost the exact same thing, except Pirate Demon Hunter is still a deck that can kind of work at top 1000. There are some lists that are good, but overall, this deck's matchup definitely got worse because of how consistent Renathal decks can just survive. And now that we've painted the meta for you, let's go ahead and go through the rest of my picks for the best decks in the game, because I really do believe that this Druid right here could actually be better than Mage for one of 2 reasons. Number 1, Renathal gives it 10 HP. You have ways of surviving against aggro to where, you know, sustaining yourself with like Pendant of Earth, doing ENR combos is very efficient. And now if you guys are familiar with ENR Druid and Titans in general, we are once again going ENR into cover artists, so we have some some very gimmicky things that this deck can do out of nowhere, especially when you include Dorian as part of that. So yeah, there's just a lot that this deck can do in terms of just summoning a bunch of minions all at once. Having, you know, double Alonius because of Dorian is absolutely insane for spell damage combos. You've got Mista in order to essentially activate the Druid Wheel of Death, as the best way of putting it, because you have lots of spells that you can put into it. I'm gonna have a video talking about this in particular, and I don't want to go over how to specifically play every single one of these decks, but just know that this particular version of Druid is one of the best ways of beating Mage right now, and I feel like one of the only reasons it's not becoming more popular is because it's slightly difficult to play. It's not that this is the most difficult deck to play in the world, but when you have something like Big Spell Mage as, like, you know, an easier deck that's just kind of the best deck in the game, when you play something like this, it just feels like an unnecessary hurdle of difficulty you don't necessarily need to put yourself through. But if you know Druid and if you like playing the style of archetype, I think it is very strong right now. And next up, we gotta talk about Pipsi Paladin, because oh boy, there are some developments for this deck. Because yes, you could just play the 30 card version of Pipsi Paladin, but there is a new version of this deck I would like to show you guys. It is not this version. That's right, I'm hitting you with the bait and switch right now, because this was the first iteration or second iteration of 40 card Pipsi Paladin that I tried to make myself, because I was thinking, you know, why not try to make cards like Grifta work, because we kept cutting it from a lot of lists. Why not put Gorgon Zormu for tempo, Dream Planner Zephyrs to have some ways of, you know, maintaining the mid game and having some AoE when I need it. You know, why not go for cards like Instrument Tech when I have, you know, 4 copies of weapons, because now I've got 2 Horn of the Wind Lords in the deck, 2 Prismatic Beams, and a Noyo Troop in order to help the consistency of my Pipsi high rolls. You know, overall, this deck does kind of make sense, even the inclusion of Cold Feet to try and stop like some of those scam decks, you know, at least by 1 turn, so they don't just, you know, play King Tide by turn 4, for example. But I'm here to tell you this is not the way to play this deck. I would actually not even recommend crafting this deck. What I would recommend, what I would unironically recommend, is this Pipsi Earthen Paladin that has absolutely just taken my brain by surprise. Like, I can't believe this is a real deck, and there's honestly one great way of being able to explain this, because this deck is just Pipsi Paladin. It's the exact same deck. You've got the 1 copy of Horn of the Windlord, you've got the Marin, you've got Prismatic Beams, you've got essentially the entire shell of Pipsi Paladin, except there is one other, you know, wing condition that has been added into the deck, and it is the Earthen package. Now, in case you don't want to go for, like, you know, the combo as soon as possible, what if playing for tempo against like a Druid and playing for board is actually more meaningful? So now you have this way of essentially highlighting this deck with the Earthen package, which, let's take a look at all of these cards. We've got the double Stoneheart King, we've got 2 Disciples, we've got 2 Cubicles, we've got the Renathal, you know, the 1 copy of the card that gives us the extra 10 cards, so there's 9 cards we can add into the deck. We've got Tier, and we've got Tears. That is literally perfectly, plus Renathal, 10 extra cards that perfectly complement this package to where it makes sense in the deck. Like, you've run every single Earthen card, and you've even got Carnivorous Cube in the deck as well in order to give extra support to cards like the Titan. I'll tell you right now, there is a video coming up. I will tell you right now, there is a video coming up to where you will see the power of playing Titan into the cube, and it is just absolutely destructive. But in addition to that, you have cards like Living Horizon, you have the Earthens themselves. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it on the Disciple itself, because then you don't get that end of turn effect, but it works very perfectly as a curve with Stoneheart King. So is this the best way of playing a 40 card Pipsi Paladin? I'm not entirely sure, but it is the most common and the most popular deck that has definitely emerged in the last day or two, and honestly, it's just really funny to see Earthen Paladin have, like, debatably one of the best runs it's ever had. So if you like the idea of playing Earthen Paladin, gonna give a shout out to Jiminator, this is a deck that you should play, but understand this. It is a Pipsi deck first and an Earthen Paladin second. The Earthens are going to be kind of cool when they work, but they are not your primary win condition. They are just extra tools to hopefully get you over that hump, because dealing an extra 10 with Renathal being in the meta can be very challenging. Next up, we're going to talk about Egg Hunter, because I feel like this is a deck that a lot of people are kind of sleeping on right now, and the only reason why I'm talking about it is because this deck has some pretty decent game against Mage. Usually when Mage is a front runner in the meta, you have Hunter to kind of act as the class that keeps it in check. But unfortunately, Hunter is kind of falling victim to the mage scam, especially when Tsunami comes up by turn 5. But one way that you can counteract it, and I know this is going to sound very specific, but if you have Mystery Egg and then it dies and then you have King Plush, you can easily play the King Plush from the discounted Mystery Egg in order to combat that turn 5 scam as like a way of kind of undoing it. And then you've also got like Hollow Hound combos in case you don't get your King Plush, to where you might have Hollow Hound into the Parasite, for example, to kill 3 elementals as well as healing yourself in the process. So this is just one of those decks to where, yes, it is very dependent on its curve in order to do well, but when it does hit its curve, it does have some decent game against Mage itself. But the version of the deck that I've definitely been having a lot more fun with is this version of XL Hunter. And honestly, I'm not really sure if cards like Greedy Partner really deserve a spot in this deck. Costume Singer definitely makes sense as a one-of because you really just want to play this card by turn 1 if at all possible, so you can draw into cards like your Hidden Meaning, and you only have 2 of these secrets, so running 2 of these doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the rest of the card inclusions kind of make sense, except maybe the Shafar. Maybe you don't necessarily need this in the deck, but one thing I kind of like about this is that if you play Shafar into a spell and then you hit your egg, now your egg is buffed and it can easily just trade without the use of your Yelling Yodeler. So there's a lot of synergies that are available in this deck. I do find it kind of sad that we do not run the Squawk. We do not run the Sasquatch, unfortunately, and the 30 card deck does run it. So if you want to get rid of the Greedy Partner for the Sasquatch, I say go ahead, go for it. But this is just one of those decks to where it feels like it should be more powerful than it is. And if there's any kind of balance changes that are happening, I really do believe that XL Hunter, and especially Egg Hunter in particular, is going to be a lot more powerful. And also, kind of spoiler in case you guys haven't heard about it, the new Hunter cards for the upcoming expansion actually look massively good. So I think if you don't like Hunter now, it's gonna get a lot of support and become a really good class once the new cards are available. And the last deck that we're talking about, and the top 5 decks in my opinion in this meta, is unfortunately Pain Warlock. Pain Warlock always bumps its ugly head whenever it is like the answer to a specific problem, and right now there is a kind of specific problem with mages to where you can kind of beat them with this deck, but honestly, I feel like Mage just loves the idea of Pain Warlock being at such a low life total that they really can't do anything about it. But this is just one of those decks where if you play the Flame Imp, if you play the Geode, if you play the Malefic Rook, if you do all this stuff and then play your Molten Giants and your Horrors into the Infernal, sometimes the Mage just doesn't have that reach in order to not only kill you at 15, but it also can't deal with your gigantic board that you've generated. You've also got cards like Speaker Stomper, Sheriff Barrel Rim, as well as Popgar as like very valuable tech cards in the deck to kind of give you some game against the mages, also including Cult Neophyte. So there are some ways that this deck can definitely take mages by surprise, but the real development of this deck is actually the inclusion of the Insanity package in the XL version of Pain Warlock. So now you've got copies of Crescendo, you've got a Baritone Imp. I think this is a very ugly list, and maybe there's a better version of this deck here somewhere, but the key thing to keep in mind is that this is a Pain Warlock first and an Insanity Warlock second. So you are still going to focus on playing cards like Molten Giant and your Imprisoned Horror as quickly as possible, but now you do have cards like Crazed Conductor, Popgar having a Crescendo, a Baritone Imp, as well as a Party Planner Vona, which I'm not really sure if I 100% agree with in the deck, but I mean, hey, it's a cool card, and it's another way of supporting Pain Warlock in a kind of interesting way, because Ouroboros, I feel like, should be a better card. I don't know, call it a hunch, but Pain Warlock is now running an XL package with some of the Insanity cards, and it actually does make sense. These next 5 decks I'm going to go through very quickly because I feel like we've already seen and talked about them a lot, but these are going to be decks that I would recommend to climb if you are not in Legend yet, but you want to get there either quickly or efficiently. And most of these decks are going to be either tempo or aggressive decks, and I know that I said that they were not necessarily the greatest against the Renathal meta, but these are my choices for decks that I feel like can definitely deal with that extra 10 life without a problem. And one of those decks I feel like definitely fits the bill is is Tempo Buttons Frost Unholy DK. The reason why I feel like this deck is very good is because one issue with Renathal decks, if Renathal decks don't have a clear, they are essentially sitting ducks for cards like Razzle Dazzler, and you have so much tempo in a deck like this to where it just feels like if they don't have an answer every single turn, you will just use your consistency and your tempo to just win more games on average. This is a deck that you're going to play and not win every single game. You're going to focus on winning 60% of your games, 55% of your games, because that's what it takes to grind to legend. So this is just one of those decks to where you play cards like Buccaneer into Horn into like a Harbinger of Winter, so that way you have your bombastic aggro start while also you're supporting yourself with your card draw. And then eventually you have your buttons that'll help you get, you know, even more tempo and more cards that just help you play mana and deal damage. You've got Horizon's Edge as a great way of maintaining into the mid game, and then you have your Mara Manipulator and your Razzle Dazzler as your late game finisher cards and board generation in order to seal the deal and not worry about that extra 10 life. Because when you're summoning like 5/5 drops from Razzle Dazzler and they don't have an AoE, it doesn't really matter, dude. You're gonna be winning the game. Next up is Pirate Demon Hunter, and I know I was talking a lot of smack about this deck, but it is still a consistent deck that is very easy and very effective if you are just trying to grind to legend. You'll have a lot of frustrating losses to where, you know, you just get killed by the tsunami by turn 5. It just happens. It's just something that you're going to have to accept. But luckily, if you are someone that is just trying to hit legend and just do it with a very effective deck that just plays the 1 into the 2 into the 3, this is still a very effective deck to where people even at top 100 legend are still playing this version of the deck. Maybe you can take out a Hot Coals for like another aggro tool if you feel like you don't like this card in particular, but Pirate Demon Hunter is still a very effective deck that can definitely help you hit legend if you are trying to do it on a budget or trying to do it a little bit faster. Shaman is currently sitting at the number 2 spot on HSReplay, and the main reason why is because of Rainbow Shaman and Nostalgia Shaman. They are two very good decks that are pretty effective at not only scamming games because of the Thrall's Gift into the Bloodlust, which I feel like a lot of people at the lower ranks do not play around, especially non-legend players, but this is just a deck that plays tempo, plays to the board, it doesn't lose it, and then suddenly when you do clear it, you've got cards like Horn of the Windlord into like, you know, Skirting Death, and unfortunately, I don't see the nature card that gives you +3 attack, Turn the Tides. I don't know why this isn't in the deck in particular, but I guess it's just to kind of go all in on supporting the Razzle Dazzler by giving yourself another shadow card, another card that adds into this. So yeah, this is still a very effective deck to where if you want to play something a little bit more mid-rangey, a little bit more like, you know, token-based, this is still a very effective deck that I feel like can help you hit legend, especially against some of those mages. This is a pretty decent answer depending on if they scam you or not. I really hate to say it, but turn 5 Tsunami is really difficult for a lot of decks to deal with. Next up, we've got the Nostalgia Shaman. Like I said, this is a very effective deck like the other Shaman, and it's kind of funny. Whenever one deck is good, the other deck is also good. So I really never can tell which of these Shaman decks is better. So I'm just gonna say play them both. See which one that you like a little bit more. Maybe the Rainbow Shaman is a little bit better as playing like a mid-range combo deck that can, you know, get over the hump with like a Ragnaros combo, which I'm pretty sure is in that deck if I'm not misremembering. But this is another version of the deck that I feel like is a lot more aggressive and is trying to win in the early stage of the game in order to play a wave of nostalgia and just absolutely dominate that way. Now, one thing that I definitely have to say, I'm not really a fan of the one-ofs in this deck, like the one backstage bouncer, for example. I feel like you definitely want 2 copies of this, but I'm just going to have this deck on the video as is, because this was a version of this deck that I found at Top Legend. This had a lot of data behind it, and it's very common. I don't know why. I don't know why people are playing this deck, but if you want to mess around with it and maybe put in 2 backstage bouncers, you can maybe get rid of like a Malted Magma, you can maybe get rid of like a Gold Panner or something like that. Some of these one-ofs just don't particularly make sense to me, so if you want to mess around with this deck, I would highly recommend it if you don't like the idea of not running 2 of these cards, because this is just a good card, right? Like, why not run 2? And the last deck that I'd recommend if you're just trying to get to Legend and not worry about what you're playing is still Insanity Warlock. It doesn't matter if your opponent has an extra 10 life when you have cards like Trog Gem Tosser, am I right? This is just one of those cards that I can't believe is still running amok the way that it is, and Druid's not even playing it anymore. just goes to show, you know, how powerful cards in Hearthstone have really become nowadays. Like, it's just absolutely bonkers. But this is still a version of the deck that I would recommend because it is just all in on trying to make Popgar into Tidepool Pupil into a very effective combo. There are a lot of people, for example, that are running the Tourist for one particular card, and I'm not really sure if I agree with this. But there are some people that are really trying to make the soul searching in this deck more effective because you can get a second Popgar, a second Crescendo. It is a very effective way of being able to search into the deck as well, kind of like the bottomless toy chest in Druid, for example. Except you can spend 5 corpses, get a copy of it, and it seems like a good card in this deck. But unfortunately, almost every single time I play this and I don't hit Crescendo or like a fatigue card, I just feel like this card is just completely unnecessary, and the version of Insanity Warlock that people are playing is still absolutely fine. So I'm not really sure if that version is better, but I haven't really been trying that much Insanity Warlock, but it is still a deck that I very much see on the ladder, especially when people are just trying to win the game as effectively as possible. If you like the idea of playing Insanity Warlock, it is still a very good deck. And now we're going to talk about my top 5 picks for my most fun, most interesting archetypes in the meta. And there is one deck in particular that I feel like one particular fan is going to be happy about, and they know exactly who they are. So let's go ahead and talk about Rainbow DK, because this was the very first deck that I really wanted to be good whenever the update dropped. I wanted a version of Rainbow DK with Climactic Necrotic Explosion to come back into the top runs of the meta. But unfortunately, this is just one of those decks to where when it works, it's really cool, but it doesn't really have a lot of games that it pops off very consistently due to the scam nature of a lot of decks, especially a top legend. So this is just one of those fair decks that you can play right now that is very dependent on its curve. So playing Salesman, playing Mining Casualties, hitting Gorgon Zormu into like a Hell Yeah or a Mon Pa. This essentially has every single niche legendary you can think about. Eliza Goreblade, the Headless Horseman, Climactic Necrotic Explosion. It's got all the weird rune cards. It looks really awesome when you look at it, and unfortunately it just kind of falls short in a lot of matchups to where it could be kind of good against Druid, for example, but only if you have that kind of curve where you just have the 1, 2 into 3 into 4. So this is just one of those archetypes that I would always, you know, put an asterisk near, where I'm like, I would always recommend it because it's fun, but in terms of winning games in Hearthstone, this is one of those decks that can be kind of hard to win with at times, just because it is not a scam deck. It doesn't really have any big blowout turns, except for like maybe debatably like a Marin pop-off turn if you get exactly the right cards. But if you want to play a Rainbow DK with Climactic Necrotic Explosion, this is a version from Maxi, who is usually chilling around like top, you know, 10 legend on 2 formats, and also won a Masters Tour recently. So if that doesn't sell you on the deck, then maybe you're just not someone that wants to play Rainbow DK. But trust me, this is still a very fun archetype that I would highly recommend if you play a lot versus your friends. Now, this is a deck that I feel like could be good on ladder, but I haven't tried it yet. But one thing I have to say is that I've seen it not only once, but twice on ladder. There are some people that are actually trying to make this kind of archetype work, where it is Hanbuff Rainbow DK that is going all in on supporting cards like Rezka, Eliza Goreblade, and running unholy cards like Dark Thorn Quilter, Toy Snatching Geist, as well as like Shambling Zombie Tank and Buccaneer, to give yourself some very meaningful support to run every single one of these runes. It makes a lot of sense. You want the Frost rune to run cards like Eliza and Rezka, for example. The Blood rune helps you run cards like the Amateur Puppeteer, and obviously you need the Unholy rune in order to also run this card. So it's just one of those decks to where it does kind of seem weird, but it's also a deck that is trying to make use of the Shafar. So, and when you think about it, you have cards like Nerubian Swarmguard, for example, to where if this hits this in your hand, suddenly you've got 3 minions to where once you play a spell, you're going to spread that death rattle to 3 different or you're going to spread that spell burst to 3 different minions. Sorry, I'm just completely caught up on how awesome this deck is, and I haven't played it yet, and you guys are probably going to expect me to make a video about it. So here I am giving you guys an early meta breakdown, deck breakdown of what this archetype can do. But yeah, Hanbuff 40 card Rainbow DK is a deck that people are actually experimenting with. Not sure if they're winning with it, but they are trying. Next up, we've got Blood DK, and I've just got some bad news for you. This is unfortunately not a good archetype, and this was one of the first decks that I really tried to make myself when Renathal got released, because I was like, an extra 10 HP. What deck would really want that? Blood DK, right? Like, if Renathal's gonna be in the meta, Blood DK has to be good, right? I wish it were that simple. I really wish Hearthstone had simple answers, but the honest to God truth is that, unfortunately, Blood DK does not have a kind of scam to where you can play this and be favored against the aggro decks, but against like Tsunami Mage, against like Owl Druid, against maybe even like a CNE Warlock to a degree, you are just really unfavored against a lot of the meta. I'm not saying it's impossible to win with this deck and do well with it, but it is one of those decks that is just very dependent on what is popular at the moment, and sadly, Mage is doable. You can beat Big Spell Mage, but if they roll and you don't have your answers, like, you know, a well-timed Corpse Explosion, for example, this deck is very dependent on very specific cards in order to not die at certain thresholds automatically. So yeah, this is just one of those decks where I would highly recommend it if you are someone that loves the idea of playing blood controlled DK, but if you are someone that is trying to grind the ranks, this is probably not the best deck to be playing right now, but it can definitely catch your opponent by surprise as soon as you play your Vampiric Blood and then they realize, oh god, my opponent is never dying. Even the Blood DK dies all the time. I don't understand it. Unfortunately, Rogue is not doing that hot right now, and I've got a very awesome deck to be showing you for this particular video, but I also wanted to use this moment to say thank you for watching the Rogue videos that we've came out with these past couple of days. They have been some of our most successful videos that have come out recently, and yeah, you guys wanted to see Rogue in action, and I'm just very sad to tell you that in the matter of Renathal being added into the meta, Rogue is just worse now. It's just worse. An extra 10 damage is a lot to ask for this class because it is an all or nothing, you know, feast or famine deck. And this is just a great example of the feast or famine aspect of Rogue. You do have Wishing Well, and we're trying to make an XL coin Wishing Well Rogue work because the extra 10 HP in Rogue to help you survive kind of makes some sense, but then when you really look at this deck, it doesn't have a lot of lifesteal, but it does have a lot of cycle. It does have, you know, the Robocaller shenanigans to try and activate the Concert Drake into the Everything Must Go combo, draw a bunch of cards, play the Everything Must Go very quickly, and we've even got a Voltron in the deck in order, you know, to have a 6-drop, so that way if you roll a 6 on the Robocaller, it's not the worst thing in the world. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this deck. You've got Sonya combos as well to also enable your Excavate combos, to where if you do play a Scorpion, for example, you have that support on being able to double up the 1-drops that get generated from it. So it's Excavate, it's coins, it's scam. It's really not that good of a deck because I played this like almost 10 games and maybe won like 4 games with it. I kind of think there should be a second breakdance, but this is about as gimmicky and as fun as Rogue can get right now. So if you don't like this particular archetype, you're just gonna have to play the other archetypes that I've shown in the past because Rogue really is struggling right now. And the last deck that I'm going to show you guys is Freebird Hunter. I don't think I need to explain what exactly is going on here, but the whole point of this deck is to do Freebird shenanigans. How do you do Freebird shenanigans? You play Mystery Egg, and then you get a bunch of Freebirds because you get to trigger the card a whole bunch of times with Yelling Yodeler. You even have cards like Hodir in order to make the Freebird combo at least a little bit more consistent, to where if you have generated a bunch of Freebirds in your hand, by turn 8, you can play Hodir into 3 0 mana Freebirds. The first one becomes 8, the second one becomes 9, the third one becomes 10, and that is a lot of damage. I believe that is 27 damage, and if you have yet another Freebird on top of that, that is even... That's lethal, actually. That's a very easy lethal, but if you also have Beastal Madness, then I believe that might work. Hold on, how does Beastal Madness work when you play Hodir? Because the minion is a 3/2, and then it becomes an 8/8, but it doesn't get the additional attack. I don't know how this works. You're gonna have to play this deck yourself. I'm giving you guys, you know, I'm giving you guys the breadcrumbs of motivation to try out a new archetype that I really do believe that you will have fun with. But to one particular viewer that has been trying to get me to play this deck on my stream, maybe I tried today. I'm not sure. I don't think this is very good into the Renathal meta, but this is just a deck that I had to highlight because he keeps telling me about it. He keeps optimizing it. I believe this is the final iteration of the deck that also runs a death roll. Not really sure what this is about, but I guess against like, you know, a Hanbuff Paladin or something, it could be kind of useful. Maybe there's like something else that you want to target. I can't really think off the top of my head why this is in the deck. But yeah, if you want to play Freebirds, if you want a somewhat fun hunter deck that is a little bit of a left hook, a little bit of a surprise gimmick, then this would be the deck I would recommend if you really want to meme on your opponents in Hearthstone. But there you have it. Those are my choices for the best decks with the Renathal inclusion. I'll say this one more time. I like Renathal. I really like what he adds into the game, but whenever we talk about him from a balanced perspective, he just makes problematic decks even worse of a problem, and it makes decks that are really fun to build even more fun to build. But unfortunately, adding an extra 10 cards to an unoptimized archetype is just not going to do a whole lot. And we are really seeing, you know, what Renathal can do in real time, because we saw Big Spell Mage get better, we saw Pipsi Paladin kind of get better, and we also saw Druid becomes absolutely bonkers and unkillable. So yeah, that's my meta report. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll be moving here very soon. This is the last meta report in this building, I believe, because we're moving very, very soon. So don't forget to check out the Patreon if you guys want to help support us to keep doing this full time. So thank you very much for making it to the end of this deck breakdown and this top 5 deck video. I'm in content creation gear right now. We're just gonna keep on going. So thank you so much for making it to the end of this breakdown, and we'll see you for the next video.